My parents favored my sister my entire life. Then she found out I had $62 million and completely lost it at Thanksgiving dinner. Dad was left speechless. Mom tried to backtrack and play the victim, but by then, I had already hit send on the eviction notice. I am Nia, 34 years old, and for decades I was the family doormat. But this year, the doormat bit back. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our household meant understanding one simple, painful rule. Bianca was the star, and I was the stagehand. Even now, as I pulled my battered 2015 Honda Civic into the driveway of my parents' sprawling suburban estate, that dynamic hung heavy in the air. I parked behind a gleaming, brand-new BMW that I knew belonged to Chad, my sister's husband. The contrast was deliberate. I could have driven a Lamborghini here if I wanted to. In fact, I owned two. But my family did not need to know that. To them, I was just Nia, the data entry clerk who lived in a studio apartment and shopped at discount bins. Keeping my wealth secret was not just a preference. It was a survival mechanism. If they knew the truth about my investment portfolio, I would not be a daughter or a sister anymore. I would just be a bank vault they would try to crack open. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance I had to put on. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. No makeup, a simple beige sweater that had seen better days, and worn-out flats. Perfect. I looked exactly like the failure they needed me to be. I stepped out into the crisp November air, grabbing a store-bought pumpkin pie from the passenger seat. It was the only contribution they allowed me to make. Bianca, of course, would have ordered catering. I had barely stepped through the front door when something heavy and wool landed squarely on my face. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the pie. I pulled the fabric away to see Chad standing there, adjusting his cufflinks. He was a tall man who thought his mediocre jawline made up for his lack of personality. He didn't even look me in the eye. "Hang that up for me, would you?" he said, his voice dripping with casual dismissal. "And while you are at it, pop the trunk of the BMW. There are gifts for your parents inside. Grab them. They are heavy, so be careful." I stood there, clutching his coat, my knuckles turning white. He knew I was his sister-in-law. He knew I was a guest. But to Chad, and to everyone in this house, I was indistinguishable from the help. I wanted to throw the coat onto the muddy floor. I wanted to tell him that the watch on his wrist was a cheap knockoff I could spot from 10 feet away. But I didn't. Not yet. The game was long, and I was playing to win. "Sure, Chad," I said, my voice flat. He didn't say thank you. He just turned his back and walked toward the living room, shouting for a scotch. I hung up his coat, fighting the urge to leave a permanent stain on it, and walked into the main hallway. The house smelled of roasted turkey and expensive perfume, the scent of a life I was supposedly excluded from. "There you are!" My mother's voice cut through the air like a serrated knife. She didn't move from her spot on the velvet armchair. She didn't open her arms. She just scanned me from head to toe, her lips pursing in distaste as her eyes landed on my shoes. "Nia, honestly. It is Thanksgiving. We have important guests coming later. Did you have to wear those shoes? You look like you just walked off a construction site." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, placing the pie on the side table where it would likely be ignored. "I am just saying," she continued, taking a sip of her wine. "Presentation matters, Nia. Look at your sister. She respects herself. She respects this family." As if on cue, a high-pitched squeal erupted from the living room. Bianca came bounding in, her silk dress flowing around her like liquid money. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, extending her left hand toward Mom so violently I thought she might dislocate her shoulder. "Look, Mom! Look at the light!" Mom gasped, dropping her wine glass onto the coaster. "Oh my goodness! Bianca, is that new?" "Chad upgraded it," Bianca beamed, wiggling her fingers so the stone caught the chandelier light. 3 carats, VVS clarity. He said I deserve the best because I have had such a hard year planning the renovation. I looked at the ring. I have spent the last 7 years analyzing assets, commodities, and luxury goods. I knew diamonds. And I knew that what was sitting on my sister's finger was a very shiny, very large piece of moissanite. It was pretty, sure, but it was not a $50,000 diamond. It was maybe $400 on a good day. Chad was lying to her, and she was too vain to notice. "It is stunning, darling," Mom cooed, finally standing up to hold Bianca's hand, completely ignoring my presence. "Just stunning. Nia, look at your sister's ring. Maybe if you focused less on whatever it is you do, and more on finding a husband, you could have nice things too." "It is very shiny, Bianca," I said, keeping my face neutral. Bianca finally turned to me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. She walked over, the scent of overpriced gardenias overwhelming my senses. She leaned in for a hug, but instead of squeezing me, she froze. Her lips brushed against my ear, her voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear. "Do not embarrass me today, Nia. Chad invited his business partners. If you act weird or poor or try to ask for money again, I swear to God I will make you regret it. Do not let your bad luck rub off on my future." She pulled back instantly, flashing a bright, fake smile at Mom. "I am so glad you made it, sis. Go help the maid in the kitchen, okay? She is struggling with the potatoes." I watched her turn around, flipping her hair, walking back to the adoring gaze of our mother. My bad luck. That is what they called it. My struggle. My poverty. They had no idea that the woman they just sent to peel potatoes could buy this entire neighborhood in cash. I walked toward the kitchen, the sound of their laughter fading behind me. Bianca was worried about luck. She should have been worried about the storm that was about to break. Because today, I was not here to beg. I was here to collect. The heavy swinging door to the kitchen clicked shut behind me, instantly muffling the boisterous laughter from the living room. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the hum of the oversized refrigerator and the rhythmic sound of my own breathing. I walked over to the island where a 10-pound bag of potatoes was waiting for me. It was almost comical. My parents had spent $80,000 renovating this kitchen last year. They had top-of-the-line appliances, a smart oven that could probably do my taxes, and gadgets for every culinary task imaginable. Yet here I was, their eldest daughter, peeling potatoes by hand because Bianca insisted that mechanical peelers bruised the vegetable flesh and ruined the aesthetic of the mash. I picked up the peeler, the metal cold against my palm, and began the repetitive motion. Scraping away the skin, just like I had spent my entire adult life scraping away my own needs to accommodate theirs. Through the gap in the door, I could see slivers of them. Mom was refilling Chad's glass. Bianca was showing off her ring to a new arrival. They looked like a picture-perfect family from a magazine advert. I was the flaw in the photograph that had been cropped out. The door pushed open behind me. I stiffened, recognizing the heavy, shuffling footsteps. It was my father. For a split second, a foolish, childish part of me sparked with hope. Maybe he had come to tell me to put the knife down. Maybe he wanted to invite me to sit on the plush sofa and ask how I was doing. I had not seen him in 3 months. I had been traveling for business, closing a merger in Tokyo, but I had told them I was taking extra shifts at the data center. "Hey, kiddo," Dad said. The nickname felt hollow, like a greeting card bought at a gas station. He leaned against the marble counter, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about my drive over. He didn't even look at me. He was looking at the reflection of the chandelier in the window. "Your mother is a bit stressed," he said, taking a sip. "You know how she gets about Thanksgiving. She just wants everything perfect for Bianca." I kept peeling. "I know, Dad." "Right." He cleared his throat. The universal signal that the pleasantries were over and the transaction was beginning. "Listen, Nia, I wanted to catch you alone before the other guests get here. Bianca is onto something big with this new interior design firm of hers. She is this close to landing a contract with the city council." I paused. Bianca did not have a design firm. She had an Instagram account with bot followers and a stack of business cards she designed on a free app. "That sounds nice," I said neutrally. "It is more than nice, Nia. It is her big break. But you know how these things work. You need to wine and dine the right people, grease the wheels of bureaucracy. She needs a little capital to host a mixer for the council members. Nothing huge, just a bridge loan." He finally looked at me, his eyes hard and expectant. "How much?" I asked. 10,000, he said, as casually as if he were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "Just until her first check clears. I would give it to her myself, but my liquidity is tied up in the market right now." I looked at my father, the man who told me he couldn't afford to help me with a down payment on a used car when I was 22, yet bought Bianca a convertible for her graduation. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. "I don't have 10 grand lying around, Dad," I lied, slicing a potato in half with a little more force than necessary. "My rent went up. My car needs a new transmission." His expression darkened instantly. The mask of the benevolent father slipped. "Don't give me that poverty act, Nia. You have been working at that computer job for 10 years. You have no husband, no kids, you live in a shoebox. Where does your money go? You are hoarding it while your sister is out there trying to build a legacy. We fed you. We clothed you. Is this how you repay us? By being stingy when family needs a leg up?" I gripped the knife handle tight. The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was so predictable. "I can't help her, Dad. I'm sorry." He slammed his glass down on the counter, the sound echoing in the large room. "You are not sorry. You are jealous. You have always been jealous of her spirit. Fix your attitude before dinner, Nia. I don't want your bitterness souring the food." He stormed out, pushing the door so hard it swung back and forth violently. I stood there, shaking slightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I would not cry. Not over them. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, composing myself, and went to the pantry to get the heavy roasting pan. The pantry was a walk-in closet, deeper than most bedrooms. As I stepped inside to grab the pan from the back shelf, I heard the kitchen door open again. I froze. I didn't have the energy for another round with my mother. But the footsteps were different, brisk, nervous, pacing. It was Chad. I stayed hidden in the shadows of the pantry, peering through the crack in the door. He wasn't talking to anyone in the room. He had his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gripping the edge of the island so hard his knuckles were white. His voice was a hushed, frantic whisper, completely different from the arrogant baritone he used in the living room. "I told you I am good for it," he hissed into the phone. "Stop threatening me. If you call my wife, the deal is off. No, you listen to me. I need 48 hours. My in-laws are signing the house over tonight. Once the deed is transferred, I can use it as collateral. Yes, the whole property. It is worth $1.5 million. Just give me 2 more days and I will have your money." My heart hammered against my ribs. I watched as he hung up, wiped sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, and smoothed his hair before walking back out to the party. I stood in the dark pantry, the roasting pan heavy in my hands. They were bullying me for $10,000, while Chad was planning to gamble away their entire home. The transition from the kitchen to the dining room felt like crossing a border between 2 hostile nations. I carried the heavy porcelain platter of roasted vegetables, my wrists straining under the weight, while my family sat comfortably around the mahogany table. The room was bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, reflecting off crystal glasses and silver cutlery that had been in our family for 3 generations. There were 5 place settings. My parents sat at the heads of the table. Bianca and Chad were seated together on the side facing the window, bathed in the best light. And then there was my spot. A folding chair squeezed into the corner near the kitchen door, where the draft from the hallway constantly nipped at my ankles. I placed the vegetables down and took my seat silently. No one thanked me. They were too captivated by Chad, who was holding court with a glass of red wine in one hand and a fork in the other, gesturing wildly as he pontificated about the stock market. "You have to understand the volatility," Chad said, his voice loud and authoritative. "It is not about the fundamentals anymore. It is about momentum. I have been tracking this new AI startup, Cyberdyne Systems. They are going public next week. I am telling you, Dad, if you move your retirement fund into this, you will see a 300% return by Christmas. It is a sure thing." My father nodded enthusiastically, looking at Chad with the kind of admiration he had never shown me, despite the fact that I had been managing my own multi-million-dollar portfolio since I was 25. Mom looked equally entranced, though I suspected she did not understand a word he was saying. She just liked that her son-in-law sounded important. I picked at my dry turkey, trying to tune him out. But then he said something that made my ears perk up. "See, the thing is," Chad continued, taking a large bite of stuffing, "I have an inside source. They are merging with Titan Logic tomorrow morning. Once that news hits the wire, the stock price is going to the moon. That is why I need liquidity now, to buy in before the bell rings." I stopped chewing. I carefully placed my fork down. Titan Logic. I knew that company. I knew them very well, because my venture capital firm, NB Ventures, had spent the last 6 months auditing them. And I knew for a fact that the merger Chad was talking about had been dead in the water for 3 days. Titan Logic had failed their compliance check. The news wasn't public yet, but anyone with actual connections knew the deal was off. If Chad put money into that stock, he would lose everything the moment the market opened. I should have stayed quiet. I should have let him drive off the financial cliff he was speeding toward, but some instinct, perhaps the last shred of familial loyalty I possessed, forced me to speak. "That merger isn't happening," I said quietly. The silence that followed was instant and suffocating. 4 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. Chad froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me?" Chad asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Did the data entry girl just speak? I kept my voice steady, staring at my plate. Titan Logic failed their SEC compliance audit on Tuesday. The board voted to kill the merger with Cyberdyne yesterday afternoon. If you buy that stock expecting a jump, you are going to tank your position. It is going to drop 40% by noon tomorrow. Chad laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. He looked around the table, inviting everyone else to join in on the joke. Listen to her. She thinks because she types numbers into a spreadsheet all day, she understands high-level corporate maneuvering. Nia, stick to what you know, which, judging by your outfit and your car, isn't making money. I looked up, meeting his gaze. I am just telling you what I know, Chad. The deal is dead. Do not throw Dad's money away on a rumor. Chad slams his hand down on the table, making the silverware rattle. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. You are calling me a liar? In my own house? I have friends on Wall Street, Nia. Real players. Who do you have? Your cat? Nia, that is enough, my father barked, his voice sharp and commanding. He wasn't looking at Chad. He was glaring at me. Why do you always have to be so contrary? Chad is trying to help this family build wealth. He is an expert. You are embarrassing yourself. But Dad, he is wrong, I insisted, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Stop it, Mom hissed. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her nails digging into my skin. Do not emasculate him like that. You are ruining dinner. Apologize to Chad immediately. I looked at them. My father, the man who taught me to always tell the truth. My mother, who claimed to value manners. They were demanding I apologize to a fraud for trying to save them from bankruptcy. The injustice of it burned in my throat like acid. But I looked at Bianca. She was watching me with a smug, predatory expression. She was enjoying this. She loved seeing me put in my place. I realized then that arguing was pointless. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the fantasy. I am sorry, Chad, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I must have read a wrong report. You are the expert. Chad huffed, straightening his jacket, his ego instantly repaired. Exactly. Just remember your place, Nia. Leave the finance to the men. He took a triumphant swig of his wine. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by the clinking of forks and knives. I went back to pushing my food around my plate, my mind racing. I had tried to warn them. I had tried to be the good daughter one last time. Now, whatever happened to their money was on their heads. Suddenly, Bianca cleared her throat. She tapped her spoon against her glass, a mimicry of the elegance she desperately tried to project. Okay, enough business talk, she chirped, her eyes gleaming with a manic excitement. We have to keep the vibes positive, because after dessert, Chad and I have a huge announcement, a plan that is going to change everything for all of us, especially you, Nia. You are going to want to hear this. My stomach dropped. The way she said my name wasn't kind. It was hungry. Whatever plan they had cooked up, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not the beneficiary. I was the target. I reached across the table to grab the sugar bowl for my coffee, my sleeve riding up just enough to expose the jagged white scar that ran from my thumb down to my wrist. It was an old injury, healed over a decade ago, but the skin there was still shiny and uneven. Good Lord, Nia, my mother grimaced, pulling her hand away as if my scar was contagious. You really should look into laser removal for that thing. It is so unsightly. No wonder you struggle with dating. Men like smooth, feminine hands, not whatever that is. I froze, looking at the mark. I didn't see ugliness. I saw the price of my sister's tuition. I saw the literal flesh and blood I had given to this family. Do you remember how I got this, Mom? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She waved her hand dismissively, picking up her dessert spoon. Oh, don't start with the melodrama. You were clumsy at that summer job, that is all. I gripped the edge of the table. It wasn't just a summer job. The memory washed over me, cold and sharp, pulling me back to the summer of 2008. I was 18 years old, clutching an acceptance letter to Georgia Tech. It was a full academic scholarship for computer engineering. It was my ticket out. I had run home, bursting with pride, only to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table with Bianca, who was crying into a pile of brochures for an elite private art school in New York. We are so proud of you, Nia, my father had said, refusing to look me in the eye. But we have a situation. Bianca's financial aid package fell through. The tuition is $60,000 a year. My heart had stopped. Okay, I said slowly, but I have a scholarship. I just need money for the dorms and books. We can't afford both, Mom had cut in, stroking Bianca's hair. And let's be honest, Nia, you are smart, but you are practical. You can go to community college here and transfer later. Bianca is an artist. She is sensitive. If she doesn't go to this school now, it will crush her spirit. We need you to decline the offer, Nia. They didn't just ask me to decline. They asked me to work. They got me a job at the canning factory where Uncle Miller was a foreman. I spent that summer standing on a concrete floor for 12 hours a day, watching cans of soup rattle by on a conveyor belt, earning minimum wage to help pay for Bianca's apartment in Manhattan. The accident happened in late August. I was exhausted, working a double shift because Bianca had called home crying about needing a new laptop. My glove got caught in the sealing machine. The metal gears ground down on my hand before the emergency stop was hit. I remembered the blood. I remembered the screaming. But mostly, I remembered my father picking me up from the emergency room and handing me a check from the factory's insurance settlement. This is a blessing, he had said. This $5,000 will cover Bianca's meal plan for the semester. I gave them everything. My dream college, my summer, the use of my right hand for 3 months. And the kicker? Bianca dropped out in October. She said the professors were too rigid and didn't understand her abstract vision. She came home, bringing nothing back but credit card debt and a portfolio of stick figure drawings. I snapped back to the present, the sound of silver spoons hitting china bringing me back to the dining room. I looked at Bianca. She was devouring a slice of pumpkin pie, the very pie I had bought, without a care in the world. She noticed me staring and wiped a crumb from her lip. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, chuckling. "God, Mom is right. That scar is gross. But honestly, sis, it is a good thing you didn't go to that engineering school. You would have been miserable. You are too stiff. You don't have the creative flow for big success." She gestured around the room, at the furniture she claimed to have picked out, at the ring on her finger. "Look at me. I followed my passion and look where it got me. Some of us are just born to be special, Nia. And some people are born to work in factories. It is just the natural order of things. My father nodded in agreement, raising his glass. To Bianca, to our visionary. I picked up my coffee cup, hiding the trembling in my scarred hand. They thought the story ended there. They thought I stayed the factory girl. They had no idea that while I was recovering, unable to use my hand, I had taught myself to code with one hand. They didn't know that the community college years were spent building algorithms that were now industry standards. They celebrated her failure as a journey and mocked my sacrifice as a lack of ambition. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Enjoy your toast, I thought, because the bill is coming due, and this time, my scar isn't the only thing that is going to be ugly. The sound of silver chiming against crystal cut through the air, sharp and demanding. My father stood up, tapping his dessert spoon against his wineglass. The room fell silent instantly. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. This was it, the main event. I saw my mother reach out and squeeze Bianca's hand, a look of conspiratorial excitement passing between them. I gripped my napkin under the table, bracing myself for whatever performance was about to unfold. "Friends, family," my father began, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a man used to commanding boardrooms. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking lately. We have worked hard for 40 years. We built this life, this home, from the ground up. But now, it is time for the next chapter." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the room before letting his gaze settle warmly on Bianca. "We have decided to retire early. We bought a condo in Boca Raton, and we are moving next month." A polite round of applause rippled through the guests. Bianca feigned surprise, covering her mouth with her manicured hands, though her eyes remained dry and calculating. "But that leaves the question of this house," my father continued, gesturing to the sprawling estate around us. "This house is the Brooks legacy. It represents our standing in the community. It represents excellence. And we cannot just sell it to strangers. It needs to stay in the family. It needs to be cared for by someone who understands its value." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was coming, but knowing didn't make the blow land any softer. I had spent my weekends mowing this lawn. I had painted these walls. I had fixed the roof leak 2 winters ago when Dad was too cheap to call a contractor. "So," he smiled, pulling a thick manila envelope from inside his jacket, "we have decided to gift the deed to the house to Bianca and Chad." The room erupted in cheers. Bianca shrieked, jumping up to hug my father, while Chad pumped his fist in the air like he had just scored a winning touchdown. I sat frozen, feeling the blood drain from my face. A $1.5 million asset, handed over on a silver platter to a sister who couldn't even keep a cactus alive and a husband who gambled away his paycheck. "Congratulations," I managed to whisper, though no one heard me over the commotion. My father held up his hand to quiet the room again. He wasn't finished. He turned slowly, his eyes finally locking onto me. The warmth in his face evaporated, replaced by a stern, businesslike expression. "Now, Nia," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "We didn't forget about you." I looked up, a tiny, foolish spark of hope igniting in my chest. Did they leave me the cabin? Or maybe just a sentimental heirloom? "You have always been the strong one, Nia," he said, pacing around the table until he stood directly behind my chair. "You are the steady one, the reliable one. Bianca, Well, Bianca is an artist. She is fragile. She needs a safe nest to create her masterpieces. But you can handle the weight of the real world. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It felt less like a comfort and more like a shackle. Because we are retiring early, our pension hasn't fully kicked in yet. And to fund the condo in Florida, we had to refinance this house last year. There is a remaining mortgage balance of $400,000 attached to the property. He paused and the room went deadly silent. I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. We cannot saddle Bianca and Chad with that kind of debt, he explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. They are just starting out. It would ruin their credit. It would stifle their potential. But you, Nia, you have that steady data entry job. You have no dependents. You live simply. You have expenses that are manageable. He dropped a second, thinner document onto the table in front of me. It was a loan assumption agreement. So, as your contribution to the family legacy, and as a thank you to us for raising you, we have arranged for the mortgage to be transferred into your name. Bianca gets the asset, you get the liability. It is the only way to make the numbers work. I stared at the paper. The black letters seemed to swim before my eyes. They weren't just disinheriting me. They were actively trying to drown me. They wanted me to pay $400,000 for a house I wasn't allowed to live in, so my sister could play pretend in a mansion she didn't earn. Dad leaned down, his breath hot against my ear, his voice a low growl that the guests couldn't hear. Don't make a scene, Nia. Sign the papers. Show your sister you actually love her for once in your life. I stared at the loan assumption agreement, the paper trembling slightly in the drafty air of the dining room. My father expected me to sign away my financial freedom so his golden child could live in luxury. It was not just unfair, it was financial suicide. I opened my mouth to refuse, to tell them exactly where they could shove this contract. But Chad raised a hand to silence me. He had that greasy, self-satisfied smile plastered on his face again, the kind he wore when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Wait, hold on, Chad said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. We have thought this through, Nia. We know this is a big ask. A mortgage is a heavy burden for a single woman with a limited income. So, Bianca and I came up with a solution. A way for you to offset the cost and actually help us out at the same time. He paused, waiting for gratitude that would never come. When I stayed silent, he continued, his voice dripping with false generosity. Since you will be paying the mortgage, you probably won't be able to afford your current apartment anymore. And honestly, throwing money away on rent is just poor financial planning. So, out of the goodness of our hearts, we are willing to let you move back in here. I looked at him confused. You want me to live here? With you and Bianca? Well, not in the main house, obviously, Chad chuckled, glancing at Bianca, who was busy admiring her reflection in a spoon. We need our privacy as newlyweds. And we are planning to turn your old bedroom into a walk-in closet for Bianca. But the basement is available. The basement? I knew that basement. It was an unfinished concrete dungeon filled with spiders, my father's old fishing gear, and a persistent mold problem that made the air thick and musty. There were no windows. The ceiling was low enough that anyone over 5'5" had to duck. It was freezing in the winter and sweltering in the summer. We are going to clear out the junk, Chad explained, waving his hand dismissively. Throw down a rug, maybe put up some drywall if we get around to it. It is a garden suite, essentially, and because you are family, we are willing to rent it to you for a fraction of the market value. Say, $2,500 a month? I choked on my own spit. $2,500 to live in a moldy storage unit in a house I was paying the mortgage on. You want me to pay the mortgage? I said slowly, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. And you also want me to pay you rent to live in the basement of the house I am paying for. It is called maximizing assets, Nia, Chad said, his tone turning condescending. Look, let's be real for a second. You are 34. You are not getting any younger. You are essentially a non-performing asset for this family. Your parents poured thousands of dollars into raising you. Food, clothes, shelter. And what is the return on investment? Nothing. You didn't marry rich. You didn't become famous. You are just there. A sunk cost. He took a sip of his wine, savoring the insult like it was a fine vintage. This is your chance to finally pay dividends, he continued. By taking on the debt and paying rent, you are finally justifying the capital your parents wasted on you. You should be thanking us for giving you a purpose. Most families would have written you off as a loss by now. I looked around the table. My father was nodding in agreement. My mother was watching me with expectant eyes, waiting for me to accept my place as the family mule. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a resource to be exploited until it ran dry. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. No, I said. My voice was calm, but underneath, I was shaking with rage. Excuse me? Chad blinked, his smile faltering. I said no. I am not signing the mortgage. I am not moving into the basement, and I am certainly not paying you $2,500 to live like a rat in a house my money is subsidizing. If you want the house, you pay for it. If you can't afford it, sell it. But do not look at me to fund your delusions of grandeur. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Then, my mother let out a wail that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. She slumped against my father, burying her face in his jacket, her shoulders shaking with dramatic, heaving sobs. "Oh, Arthur," she cried, her voice muffled but loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I told you she didn't love us. We are being abandoned. Our own daughter is throwing us to the wolves. How could I have given birth to someone so cold? My heart is breaking, Arthur. It is physically breaking. My mother let out a gasp that sounded more theatrical than pained, clutching her chest with a manicured hand. Her other hand groped blindly for my father's sleeve, gripping the fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white. The silence of the dining room shattered instantly. "Arthur," she wheezed, her voice trembling with a practiced frailty I had seen a dozen times before. My chest. It feels like an elephant is sitting on it. I cannot breathe. My father was on his feet in a second, rushing to her side. He knocked his chair over in the process, the loud clatter adding to the chaos. He began fanning her with a cloth napkin, his face twisted in a mask of panic that seemed almost genuine. "Elaine, breathe," he commanded, his voice shaking. "Just breathe for me. Someone get water. Bianca, get her pills." I sat frozen in my chair, watching the performance unfold. I had seen this show before. I saw it when I wanted to go to prom instead of staying home to help Bianca with a science project. I saw it when I moved out at 22. Whenever my mother faced a boundary she could not cross with authority, she crossed it with a medical emergency. Her heart was perfectly healthy. Her cardiologist, whom I paid for, had confirmed it 3 months ago. But that did not stop her from using angina as a negotiation tactic. Dad turned on me, his eyes blazing with a fury that made him look 10 years older. "Are you happy now?" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Look at what you have done. Your mother has a weak heart, and you are pushing her into a grave over a few dollars." "I am not pushing her anywhere, Dad," I said calmly, though my pulse was racing. "I am just refusing to be exploited." "Exploited?" he laughed, a harsh barking sound. "We are asking for help. We are asking you to be a part of this family. But you are so selfish, so wrapped up in your own little world that you would rather see your mother suffer than part with your precious paycheck." Mom let out another low moan, her head lolling back against the chair. "Please," she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Please, just stop fighting. I can't take the fighting. I just want my girls to be settled. I just want peace." Bianca seized the moment like the opportunist she was. She snatched the loan assumption agreement from the table and shoved it toward me, sliding a heavy fountain pen across the polished wood. "Fix this, Nia," Bianca hissed, her eyes wet with fake tears. "Do you want her to have a stroke right here at the dinner table? Just sign the damn paper. Give her peace of mind so we can call an ambulance without her worrying about the house." I looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, a gift I had given my father for his 60th birthday. Now it was being used as a weapon to sign away my future. The pressure in the room was suffocating. My father was glaring at me with pure hatred. My mother was gasping for air, playing the victim to perfection. Bianca was hovering over me, practically vibrating with anticipation. If I signed, the tension would break. Mom would miraculously recover after a glass of water. Dad would pat me on the back and say I finally did the right thing. I would be the hero for 5 minutes and the slave for 30 years. I reached out and picked up the pen. "See, Mon? She is doing it," Bianca cooed, rubbing Mom's shoulder. "Nia is signing it. Everything is going to be fine. Just breathe." I held the pen over the signature line. The ink was black, permanent, just like the debt they were trying to shackle me with. I looked at the numbers on the page again. $400,000. A standard mortgage refinance agreement. But something in my brain, the part that analyzed risk for a living, clicked into gear. I stopped. The tip of the pen hovered millimeters above the paper. "I remember the day we burned the mortgage papers," I said softly. The room went quiet. Even Mom's labored breathing seemed to pause for a split second. "What are you talking about?" Chad asked, his impatience leaking through his concern. "Just sign it." I looked up, meeting my father's eyes. I was 24. You and Mom threw a barbecue in the backyard. You made a big speech about how the house was finally paid off. You burned the banknote in the grill. You said we were debt-free forever. That was in 2012. I lowered the pen, tapping it rhythmically against the table. "So, if the house has been fully paid off for over a decade, and you only refinanced last year to buy the condo, why is there a $400,000 lien on this property? This isn't a mortgage, Dad. This is a fresh loan." I locked eyes with him, watching the color drain from his face, replaced by a different kind of fear. "Where did this debt come from, Dad? Because you didn't spend $500,000 on a condo in Florida. I checked the listings there. That place cost $200,000. So tell me, before I sign my life away, where did the rest of the money go?" The silence that followed my question was not the quiet of a library. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom, right before the guilty verdict is read. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at the tablecloth, and Chad, for the first time all evening, looked absolutely terrified. He picked up his wineglass, his hand shaking so badly that red liquid sloshed over the rim and stained the white linen, blooming like a fresh gunshot wound. Dad cleared his throat, a wet, rattling sound. Well, Nia, you know how the market is. It fluctuates. We wanted to help Chad get his portfolio off the ground. He had a tip on a new cryptocurrency. It was supposed to rival Bitcoin. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Chad, who was now aggressively wiping the wine spill, refusing to meet my eyes. You took out a $400,000 mortgage on a paid-off house, I repeated, making sure I understood the sheer scale of the insanity. And you gave the cash to Chad to buy crypto coins? It was a sure thing, Chad snapped, finally looking up. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. It was called Lunar Coin. The white paper was solid. We were projected to 10 times our investment in 3 months. That money was supposed to turn into $4 million, Nia. We were going to buy you a house too. We were doing this for everyone. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a cold, humorless sound that seemed to bounce off the walls. I knew Lunar Coin. It was a classic pump and dump scheme that had imploded 6 months ago. The founders had disappeared with everyone's money. So let me get this straight, I said, leaning forward. You gambled my parents' home, their retirement security, and my inheritance on a scam that any first-year finance student could have spotted from a mile away. And now that the money is gone, vaporized into thin air, you want me to take on the debt? You want me to pay for your gambling addiction? It was not gambling, Chad roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The silverware jumped. It was venture capital. You wouldn't understand because you have never taken a risk in your life. You sit in your cubicle, entering data, while people like me are out there trying to build dynasties. My mother began to sob again, louder this time. Oh, stop it, please. Chad tried his best. He wanted to buy us a vacation home. His intentions were pure. Nia, why do you have to be so cruel? Why can't you just support him? I looked at her, incredulity warring with disgust. You are defending him? He lost $500,000 of your equity, Mom. He swindled you. And you are asking me to clean up his mess so he doesn't have to face the consequences? He is family, Dad shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. And in this family, we help each other. We don't kick a man when he is down. Chad is going to make it back. He just needs time. By taking this mortgage, you are buying him time. It is the least you can do after we raised you. I stood up slowly. The chair legs shrieked against the floor. I looked at the loan agreement, then at the pen, and finally at Chad. No, I said firmly. I will not sign. I will not pay for his stupidity. Sell the BMW, Chad. Sell the ring on Bianca's finger. Sell your designer suits, but do not come to me for a bailout. Chad stood up too. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, and he used his height to intimidate. He walked around the table until he was looming over me, invading my personal space. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and the fear sweating out of his pores. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by me. Listen to me, you little mouse, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. You think you have a choice here? You think you can just walk away? I know people, Nia. I know the staffing agency that contracts your pathetic little data entry job. I play golf with the vice president of operations. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing into slits. If you don't pick up that pen and sign this paper right now, I will make a phone call tomorrow morning. I will tell them you are stealing confidential data. I will tell them you are unstable. I will have you fired, blacklisted, and ruined before you can even finish your morning coffee. You are an ant, Nia. I am the boot. I can squash your cheap little career with one conversation. So be a good girl. Sit down and sign the damn paper. The air in the room shifted. Chad's threat to destroy my career hung heavy over the table. But instead of scolding him for his cruelty, my parents seemed to take it as a cue. They realized that intimidation alone might not work, so they switched tactics. They decided to aim for the one thing they thought I feared more than bankruptcy. They aimed for my loneliness. My mother stopped her fake sobbing. She straightened up, smoothing her napkin on her lap with eerie calm. She looked at me not with anger, but with a pity that felt far more cutting. "Nia, look at yourself," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, the way one speaks to a slow child. "You are 34 years old. You live alone in a rented apartment. You drive a car that rattles. You spend your weekends working because you have no one to come home to." She gestured to Bianca and Chad, who were sitting close together, presenting a united front of marital bliss, however fraudulent it might be. "Your sister has built a life. She has love. She has a future. But you? You are drifting, Nia. You are untethered. And we worry about you. We worry that without us, without this family anchoring you, you will just float away into nothingness." My father nodded, leaning forward, his voice grave. "This isn't just about money, Nia. It is about loyalty. It is about proving that you belong to this tribe. Because if you walk out that door without signing this paper, you are making a choice. You are choosing to be a stranger." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "And if you are a stranger, then we have no obligation to include you. No more Christmases, no more birthdays. And I will make sure everyone knows why. I will call your Aunt Sarah. I will call the pastor. I will tell them that when your mother was sick and your sister was in trouble, you turned your back on us to hoard your pennies. You will be a pariah, Nia." I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. They knew exactly where to strike. For years, my greatest insecurity had been my solitude. While Bianca was dating prom kings, I was studying. While she was planning her wedding, I was building my company. I had sacrificed relationships for success, and they were weaponizing that sacrifice against me. Bianca laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. "Face it, Nia. You need us more than we need you. Who else is going to put up with you? You are difficult. You are prickly. You are barely decorative. If you lose us, who is going to visit you in the hospital when you get old? Your cats?" She leaned in, her eyes glinting with malice. "Sign the paper, sis. Buy your way back in. Because honestly, without this family, you are just a sad, middle-aged woman with a scar on her hand and an empty bed. We are offering you a purpose. Don't be stupid enough to throw it away." I looked at them. My mother, the architect of my insecurities. My father, the enforcer, My sister, the beneficiary. They truly believed that my life was empty. They believed that their conditional love was the only thing giving my existence value. They thought I was desperate for a seat at their table, even if that seat was in the basement. For a moment, the old Nia, the little girl who just wanted her daddy to be proud of her, wanted to pick up the pen. She wanted to sign away her future just to stop the insults, just to avoid the crushing weight of being truly orphaned. But then, my pocket vibrated. It was a sharp, insistent buzz against my thigh, then another, and another. It wasn't a casual text. I knew that vibration pattern. It was the priority notification from my secured work phone. I slowly reached into my pocket, ignoring my father's glare. "Put that away," he snapped. "We are talking about your future." I didn't listen. I pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. It was an encrypted email from my chief financial officer, marked urgent. The subject line read simply, "Q3 performance report and liquidity event confirmation." I unlocked the screen. My eyes scanned the summary. My primary investment fund had outperformed market expectations by 18%. A tech startup I had seeded 3 years ago had just been acquired by a major conglomerate. The payout was hitting my account within the hour. I looked at the number at the bottom of the screen. It was a number with a lot of zeros. It was a number that could buy this entire subdivision, not just this house. I looked up from the screen, and for the first time that night, the fog of guilt lifted. I looked at Bianca, with her fake ring and her debt-ridden husband. I looked at my parents, who were terrified of losing their social status. They called me empty. They called me poor. They thought I was afraid of being alone. But as I held the proof of my empire in my hand, I realized something profound. I wasn't the one who was afraid. They were. They were terrified because they were broke, they were frauds, and they needed a host to feed on. I wasn't the victim here. I was the bank, and the bank was about to close. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the metal casing warm against my palm. The fear regarding my social standing evaporated. Let them tell the pastor. Let them tell Aunt Sarah. I could buy the church a new roof and fly Aunt Sarah to Paris first class if I wanted to. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "I do have a choice to make, and I think I am finally ready to make it." Chad grinned, pushing the pen closer to me. "Smart girl. I knew you would come to your senses. Just sign on the X." I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I reached for my purse and pulled out my tablet. It was time to show them exactly what kind of data entry I really did. The vibration of the phone in my pocket stopped, but the aftershocks of the financial report I had just read were still reverberating through my body. $62 million. That was the reality of my life. But in this dining room, the reality was a cheap fountain pen and 4 people trying to bully me into servitude. I looked at Chad, who was still grinning like a shark that smelled blood. I looked at my parents, who wore expressions of weary disappointment, as if my hesitation to ruin my life was a personal failing. And then I looked at Bianca. She was vibrating with rage. My silence wasn't submission to her. It was defiance. To a narcissist like Bianca, being ignored was worse than being yelled at. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Sign it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Just sign the damn paper, you selfish, jealous little loser!" I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched her unravel. "You think you are so special because you live alone and hoard your pathetic salary," she continued, her breathing jagged. "You are nothing. You are just the mistake Mom and Dad had before they got it right with me. You are a placeholder, Nia, and now you have a chance to actually be useful, to actually justify your existence, and you are sitting there judging us?" She reached for her wine glass. I saw it coming, but I didn't dodge. I didn't give her the satisfaction of flinching. With a guttural shriek of frustration, she wound up and hurled the contents of the glass at me. The dark red liquid hit me square in the chest. It splashed up onto my chin, soaking instantly into the beige wool of my sweater. The cold wetness seeped through to my skin, shocking and sharp. A few drops landed on the table. A few more splattered onto the legal document in front of me. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the dripping of expensive Merlot onto the hardwood floor. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. But she didn't rush to me. She didn't grab a napkin to help me dry off. Instead, she looked at Bianca with concern. "Oh, honey, look what you did," Mom cooed, reaching out to steady my sister. "You are shaking. You are so upset. Nia, look at what you drove your sister to do. Why do you have to provoke her like this?" I sat there, the wine dripping from my chin. That was it. That was the final straw. The bridge didn't just burn, it disintegrated. I picked up the linen napkin from my lap, slowly, deliberately. I wiped the wine from my face. I looked at the red stain on the white cloth. It looked like blood. The blood of the daughter they had just killed. I stood up. I didn't stand up like the slouching, apologetic Nia they knew. I stood up to my full height. I rolled my shoulders back. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the wine and the rot of this family. When I looked up, I didn't mask the intelligence in my eyes anymore. I didn't hide the predator that lived inside the data entry clerk. I looked straight at Chad. He stopped smiling. He took a half step back, confused by the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. I looked at my father, who was frowning, sensing a loss of control but unable to place it. Finally, I looked at Bianca, who was panting, waiting for me to cry or run away. "You called me garbage," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and terrified them because it sounded nothing like the girl who had walked in here an hour ago. "You said I was a bad investment. You said I was poor." I picked up the loan agreement, now speckled with wine stains. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table like confetti. "You spent this entire dinner talking about assets and liquidity and net worth," I continued, walking slowly around the table toward my purse. "You belittled my job. You mocked my clothes. You threatened my livelihood because you think I am weak. You think money is the only language that matters in this world." I reached my bag. I unzipped it. The sound was sharp in the silence. "Well, if you want to speak the language of money, let us speak it. But be warned, I am much more fluent than you are." I reached inside and bypassed the checkbook they were hoping for. My hand closed around the cold aluminum of my iPad Pro. I pulled it out, the screen waking up with a soft glow. "Sit down, Chad," I commanded. And for the first time in his life, He listened. I placed the iPad on the table, right next to the turkey carcass. I swiped up, unlocking the device. "You wanted to know where my money goes?" I asked, tapping the icon from my primary brokerage account. "You wanted to know why I live in a studio apartment." I turned the screen around so it faced them. The bright white numbers of my dashboard illuminated their stunned faces. "Let me introduce you to the real Nia Brooks, and let's see if you still think I belong in the basement." Chad let out a long, heavy sigh of relief, leaning back in his chair with a smug satisfaction that made my skin crawl. He thought he had won. He interpreted my silence as submission and my iPad as a checkbook. To him and my family, this was the moment the rebellious child finally fell back in line. Bianca smoothed her dress, the rage vanishing from her face as quickly as it had appeared, replaced instantly by a look of greedy anticipation. She actually picked up her fork and took another bite of pie, as if she hadn't just thrown wine at me 30 seconds ago. "It is about time," Chad said, chuckling as he watched me tap the screen. "I knew you would come around, Nia. You are risk-averse. You always have been. You realized that without us, you have zero social standing. Smart move. Now, just transfer whatever liquid cash you have to the joint account number I gave Dad. We can work out a payment plan for the rest of the $400,000 later." My father nodded, taking a sip of water to clear his throat. "You are doing the right thing, Nia," he said, his voice regaining its paternal authority. "We will forget this little outburst happened. Just pay the initial installment, sign the papers, and we can all move forward as a family." I ignored them. My fingers moved across the glass surface of the tablet, but I wasn't logging into a personal checking account. I wasn't checking a savings balance. I was bypassing the biometric security of a corporate mainframe. "Is the Wi-Fi password still the same?" I asked, my voice calm, almost bored. Chad rolled his eyes. "Yes, it is the same. Stop stalling. Do you need me to come over there and help you navigate the app? I know these banking interfaces can be tricky for people who don't move large sums of money often." I didn't answer. I just tapped the icon for AirPlay. A soft chime echoed through the dining room as the 70-inch smart television mounted above the fireplace woke up. The screen, which usually displayed a slideshow of family photos that noticeably excluded me, went black for a second. "What are you doing?" Bianca asked, looking up from her plate with a frown. "Why are you turning on the TV? We are trying to do business here." "I am just trying to give you the full picture," I said. "You wanted transparency. You wanted to know exactly what I am bringing to this family. So I think it is better if we all look at the same data." The screen flickered, and then, with crystal clear resolution, my iPad display was cast onto the wall. It was not a Bank of America login page. It was not a Wells Fargo savings account. The screen was dominated by a sleek, intimidatingly professional dashboard. The background was a deep, rich navy blue. In the center, pulsing with a subtle golden light, was a logo. It was a sharp, stylized N intertwined with a geometric B sitting above the words NB Global Ventures. Below the logo, a series of complex graphs and tickers were moving in real time, tracking markets in Tokyo, London, and New York. The room went quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. It was the silence of confusion. My mother squinted at the screen, tilting her head. "What is this?" she asked. "Is this a video game?" "Nia, stop playing around." But Chad didn't speak. He didn't blink. He sat, frozen in his chair, his face slowly draining of all color. His eyes were locked on that logo. The smugness that had defined his features for the last 2 hours began to crack, replaced by a dawning horror. He knew that logo. Anyone who claimed to be in finance, even a fraud like him, knew that logo. It was the logo of the venture capital firm that had been aggressively acquiring tech startups across the Pacific Northwest for the last 5 years. It was the logo that appeared on the top of the letterhead for the rejection letter he had received last week. It was the logo of the shark that ate the little fish he pretended to be. Chad stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His hands were trembling. He looked from the screen to me and then back to the screen, his brain struggling to reconcile the data entry clerk in the stained sweater with the corporate branding looming over the dinner table. "Wait," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. That is NB Global." He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "Nia, why do you have the admin access for NB Global Ventures on your iPad? That is the company that just bought out the mortgage securities in this entire zip code. Why is their logo on your screen?" "You asked why I have admin access to this interface," I said, my voice steady and echoing slightly in the stunned silence of the dining room. "You asked why the logo of the most aggressive venture capital firm in the Pacific Northwest is on my personal device." I stood up and walked slowly toward the television screen, the light from the digital dashboard casting long shadows across the table. I pointed a finger at the golden letters glowing against the navy blue background, the N intertwined with the B. "NB Ventures," I read aloud. "It is not just a random collection of letters, Chad. It is a monogram. N for Nia, B for Brooks." My mother let out a scoff, a sharp, dismissive sound that betrayed her desperation to keep her world from tilting off its axis. "Don't be ridiculous, Nia," she said, though her voice wavered. "You are trying to tell us you own a company? You? You drive a Honda with a dented bumper. You wear clothes from the clearance rack. Is this some kind of multi-level marketing scheme? Did someone trick you into thinking you are a CEO? I turned to look at her. For the first time, I didn't see the woman who held authority over me. I saw a small, frightened person clinging to a delusion. "It is not a scheme, Mother," I replied. "And the Honda is a choice. It is called stealth wealth. It is a concept you wouldn't understand because you have spent your entire life trying to look rich while drowning in debt." I tapped the screen again, pulling up a timeline of events. "You always mocked my job. You told everyone I was a lowly data entry clerk, and I never corrected you because, technically, I do work with data. I analyze market trends. I value assets. I predict the future of technology sectors. The only difference is that when I enter data, markets move." I swiped to a photo gallery within the secure drive. "Do you remember last January?" I asked. "You called me screaming because I couldn't cat sit for Bianca while she went on a ski trip. You told the whole family I was selfish because I said I had to travel for work. You assumed I was going to some cheap motel for a training seminar." I tapped a photo. It filled the screen. It was me, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than Bianca's wedding dress, standing on a stage in Switzerland, shaking hands with the head of the International Monetary Fund. I wasn't at a seminar, Mom. I was at Davos. I was speaking at the World Economic Forum on the future of decentralized finance. I swiped again. Another photo. Me in Silicon Valley, standing in front of a glass building, cutting a red ribbon with the governor of California. And last month, when I missed Dad's birthday dinner, I wasn't sulking in my apartment. I was in Palo Alto, closing the acquisition of the semiconductor plant that Chad was just bragging about. I looked over at Chad. He was not scoffing like my mother. He was sweating profusely. He was a man who read the Financial Times. He knew exactly what NB Ventures was. He knew they were known as the Wolves of Seattle. He knew they tore weak companies apart. And now, he was realizing that the wolf had been sitting across from him, passing him the potatoes for the last 2 hours. You founded NB Ventures? Chad whispered, his voice cracking. But that fund manages over $300 million in assets. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. Actually, as of the close of markets today, our assets under management just crossed $500 million. But who is counting? I walked back to the table and picked up my iPad. I could see the gears turning in Chad's head. He was terrified, yes, but he was also calculating. He was wondering if he could pivot. He was wondering if he could flatter me. He was wondering if being the brother-in-law of a venture capitalist could save him from his gambling debts. But I wasn't done with him yet. I tapped the mail icon. "It is funny you mentioned your friends on Wall Street earlier, Chad," I said, casually scrolling through my inbox. "And it is funny you mentioned knowing the staffing agencies, because I know people too. I know the HR department of my own company very well." I found the file I was looking for. I opened it. "We received an application last week for a junior analyst position," I said, reading from the screen. The resume was impressive. Inflated, full of buzzwords, and listing references that, when we checked them, turned out to be fraternity brothers. But the name on the application stood out to me. I turned the iPad around again so he could see the PDF displayed on the screen. It was his resume. Chad Miller, I read. "I remember seeing this come across my desk on Tuesday. My hiring manager wanted to bring you in for an interview. He thought you might have potential." Chad sat up straighter, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "Really?" he asked, breathless. "Yes, really," I said. But then I stepped in. I told them that the applicant was personally known to me. I told them that he lacked integrity, had a history of poor financial judgment, and possessed a narcissistic streak that would be toxic to our company culture. I tapped the screen one final time, bringing up the rejection letter that was currently sitting in the drafts folder, scheduled to be sent on Monday morning. "I personally flagged your application for immediate rejection, Chad. And just so we are clear, in the finance world, when NB Ventures blacklists a candidate, that name goes into a database shared by every major firm on the West Coast. You didn't just lose a job opportunity. You lost your career." "You are lying," Chad stammered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. He stood up and pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "You faked this. I know about these things. There are websites where you can mock up fake dashboards to look like real banking apps. You probably spent all week designing this just to humiliate us." He looked around the room, desperate for allies. "Don't you see? He is gaslighting us. Nia cannot possibly be the CEO of NB Ventures. She buys her clothes at Target. She drives a 10-year-old car. People with this kind of money do not live like peasants. It is a prank. It is a sick, twisted prank." My mother let out a breath she had been holding, latching onto Chad's explanation like a lifeline. "Of course," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously between me and the iPad. "Of course it is a prank." "Nia, this is not funny. You almost gave your father a heart attack. Turn that screen off right now and apologize. You have taken this jealousy thing too far." I looked at them. They were terrified. Their brains were literally refusing to process the information, because accepting it meant accepting that they had been abusing the most powerful person in their bloodline for years. They needed me to be a failure, because if I was a success, then their treatment of me was not tough love. It was just cruelty. I am not asking you to believe a screenshot, I said, my voice cutting through their frantic rationalizations. I know how easy it is to manipulate an image. Chad does it with his credit score every time he applies for a loan. Chad flinched, but I didn't stop. I am going to log out, I said, tapping the screen. And then I am going to log back in, right here, live, in front of you. I tapped the sign out button. The dashboard vanished, replaced by a secure login prompt. The room went deadly quiet again. Watch closely, I said. I held the iPad up so the camera faced me. The Face ID icon swirled on the screen, scanning my features. It verified my identity instantly. A small green checkmark appeared. Then, the dual-factor authentication prompt popped up. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked up my phone and read the code aloud. 7492110. I typed the numbers into the iPad. The loading wheel spun for a second. It was the longest second of my parents' lives. And then, the vault opened. The screen refreshed, pulling live data from the secure server. The dashboard reappeared, but this time I tapped on the tab marked Liquid Assets and Cash Reserves. The number filled the center of the screen in bold, white font. $62,450,312.14. I read the number out loud, articulating every syllable. That is my personal liquidity, I explained, pointing to the figure. That is not company money. That is not tied up in stocks. That is cash. Money I can withdraw, transfer, or burn if I feel like it. I swiped left. And here is my real estate portfolio. I own 3 apartment complexes in Seattle, a commercial tower in Bellevue, and a vacation villa in Tuscany that I rent out to celebrities. I looked at Bianca. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were glazed over. She was looking at that number. 62 million. And I could see her doing the math. She was calculating how many fake rings, how many BMWs, and how many renovations that money could buy. She looked like she was malfunctioning. But Dad? Dad looked like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped back in his chair, his face turning a pale, waxy gray. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in his life. He didn't see his daughter. He saw power. He saw the missed opportunity. He saw the years of neglect and realized he had bet on the wrong horse. You have $62 million? He whispered, his voice trembling. And you let us struggle? You let us worry about retirement? You let your sister struggle to start her business? I didn't let you do anything, Dad, I said coldly. You chose to struggle because you kept pouring your resources into a black hole named Bianca. And as for letting you worry, you never asked me if I was okay. You never asked about my work. You only ever asked for my money when you thought I had barely enough to survive. You wanted my crumbs. You didn't deserve the loaf. The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating, like all the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer gravity of my bank account. My mother was staring at the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was trembling. Her hand, which had been holding her dessert fork halfway to her mouth, went limp. Clatter. The silver fork hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, ringing sound that echoed like a gunshot. She didn't move to pick it up. She just stared at me, her face crumbling as the realization hit her. She had spent 30 years favoring the child who needed a handout and treating the child who owned the bank like a servant. And now, the bill was due. My father looked at the screen, then at me, and a smile crept onto his face. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. He clearly did not understand the gravity of what I had just shown him. He only saw the zeros. He saw a safety net that was suddenly wide enough to catch his falling ego and his crumbling finances. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, and let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark of relief. "Well, this changes everything," he said, spreading his hands wide as if to embrace me. "Nia, honey, why didn't you tell us? If we had known you were doing so well, we never would have worried you with this mortgage business. 62 million! My God, that is generational wealth." He looked at Mom, who was still staring at the dropped fork on the floor, and nudged her. "Elaine, did you hear that? Our girl is a tycoon, a bona fide tycoon." He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with greed. "So this $400,000 debt is nothing to you. It is pocket change. It is what you probably spend on, well, I don't know what you spend it on, but it is insignificant. You can just write a check and clear the title tonight. Then the house is free and clear for Bianca, and you won't even feel the pinch. It is the perfect solution." I watched him plan my money. I watched him mentally spend my hard-earned capital to rescue the very people who had treated me like a parasite for 3 decades. He really thought that money erased history. He thought that being rich meant I was now obligated to be their savior. I closed the cover of my iPad. The glow of the screen vanished, leaving the room dim again. "You were right, Dad," I said softly. $400,000 is insignificant to me. I made that amount while we were eating the appetizers. See? He clapped his hands together. "I told you, Chad. She is family. She will take care of it." "But I am not going to write a check to clear the title," I continued, my voice hardening, "because I don't need to." My father frowned, his hands freezing in midair. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I don't need to pay off the bank, Dad, because there is no bank." I walked over to the sideboard where I had left my purse. I could feel their eyes on me, confused and anxious. I turned back to face them, leaning against the wall with the casualness that terrified them. "Who did you refinance with last year?" I asked. It was barely a question. I knew the answer. My father blinked. "It was First City Regional." "Why?" "First City Regional was over-leveraged," I explained, using my boardroom voice. "They made too many risky loans to people who couldn't afford them. People who used their homes as ATMs to fund lavish lifestyles and crypto scams. Last month, First City needed liquidity. They held a fire sale of their distressed assets. They sold off a portfolio of bad loans to the highest bidder." I took a step closer to the table. "My fund, NB Ventures, specializes in distressed asset acquisition. We bought that portfolio. We bought 500 mortgages that were flagged as high risk. And do you know whose name I saw on line item 402? I pointed a finger at my father. "Arthur and Elaine Brooks." Chad let out a strangled noise, like he was choking on a fishbone. He understood. He finally understood. You bought the mortgage?" Chad whispered. I didn't just buy the mortgage, Chad, I corrected him. I bought the debt. I bought the right to collect. I bought the lien on this property. I looked at my parents. For the last 30 days, you haven't been sending your mortgage payments to First City Regional. You have been sending them to a holding company owned by me. I am not the daughter you are asking for a loan, Dad. I am the bank you have been defaulting on. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. You own our debt? You are our landlord? Technically, I am your creditor, I said. And as your creditor, I have been reviewing your payment history. It is not good. You are late. You are underwater. And you just admitted in front of witnesses that you gave the equity to Chad to gamble away. That is a violation of the loan terms. It is considered financial negligence. I reached into my purse one last time. I told you I brought a gift. But since I am the bank, and banks don't give gifts, I brought some paperwork instead. I pulled out a thick, bright red envelope. It was the kind you usually see at Lunar New Year, filled with lucky money. It was festive. It was cheerful. It was the only red thing in the room besides the wine stain on my shirt. My father stared at the red envelope. Is that a check? Are you buying us out? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. No, Dad. In some cultures, red means luck. But in the business world, red means stop. Red means loss. Red means the end of the line. I tossed the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Bianca's empty plate. Open it, I said. Bianca reached out with a trembling hand. She tore open the flap. She didn't find cash. She didn't find a check. She pulled out a single, folded legal document with a stamp from the county sheriff's office at the top. She read the bold letters at the top of the page, her voice shaking so hard the words were barely audible. Notice of foreclosure and eviction proceedings. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. You are kicking us out? She screamed. You are kicking Mom and Dad out? On Thanksgiving? I checked my watch. Actually, the filing went through this morning. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I suggest you start packing now. Those BMW payments are going to be hard to make when you are paying a security deposit on a rental. I looked at my father, who had collapsed into his chair, a broken man. You wanted me to pay for the house, Dad. Well, I just did. I paid for it, so now it is mine. And I don't rent to people with bad credit. The red envelope lay on the table like a grenade that had just detonated, leaving my family in the wreckage of their own entitlement. Bianca stared at the eviction notice, her hands shaking so violently that the paper rattled like a dry leaf in a storm. For a moment, she looked paralyzed, her brain unable to comprehend the word eviction. But then, the paralysis snapped. The shock morphed instantly into a feral, uncontained rage. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She lunged. With a guttural shriek that sounded less like a human and more like a wounded animal, Bianca threw herself across the table. Her target wasn't me. It was the iPad. In her twisted logic, if she could destroy the screen that displayed my wealth, she could destroy the reality of it. If she could smash the device, the debt would disappear, and she would be the golden child again. Her fingernails, long and manicured, clawed at the air inches from my face as she reached for the tablet. "Give it to me!" she screamed, her face twisted and ugly. "Delete it! Delete it Right now. You are lying. You are a liar. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Because before she could reach me, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder and yanked her back with brutal force. It was Chad. He dragged his wife back into her chair, pinning her arms to her sides. Bianca thrashed against him, kicking at the table legs, overturning her wine glass. But Chad held firm. He wasn't protecting me out of brotherly love. He was protecting himself out of sheer terror. He had seen the database. He knew exactly who I was now. He realized that attacking the CEO of a major venture capital firm physically was a one-way ticket to a jail cell, and he had enough legal problems already. "Stop it, Bianca," Chad hissed into her ear, his voice trembling with panic. "Are you insane? Sit down. Do not touch her. Do not touch that computer." "Let me go," Bianca wailed, sobbing now, huge heaving breaths that racked her thin frame. "She is stealing our house, Chad. She is stealing my life. Make her stop." "She owns the debt, Bianca," Chad shouted, shaking her once to make her listen. "She is the bank. You cannot fight the bank. If you hit her, she will sue us for assault on top of the foreclosure. We are already dead in the water. Don't make it worse." The room fell into a heavy, panting silence. Bianca slumped in her chair, weeping into her hands, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Chad stood over her, pale and sweating, looking at me with the eyes of a dog waiting to be kicked. Then, my parents made their move. They exchanged a look. It was a look I knew well. It was the pivot. The moment they realized intimidation had failed, so they had to switch to their secondary weapon: guilt. My father slowly stood up, not aggressively this time, but with a weary, defeated posture. He walked around the table, stepping over the spilled food and broken glass, approaching me with his palms open in a gesture of surrender. "Nia," he said, his voice dropping to a low, trembling register. "Look at this. Look at what is happening to us. We are a family. We are your flesh and blood." He stopped a few feet away, careful not to invade my space, acting as if I were a volatile explosive. "I know we were hard on you tonight," he continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know we said some things we shouldn't have. But you have to understand. We were scared. We are old, Nia. We were facing financial ruin. Fear makes people do ugly things." My mother joined him, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. She didn't look at Bianca. She looked only at me, beaming a beam of desperate, terrified affection. "We love you, Nia," she choked out. "We have always loved you. Maybe we didn't show it the right way. Maybe we made mistakes. But we are your parents. We changed your diapers. We sat by your bed when you had the chicken pox. Doesn't that count for anything?" She reached out, her hand hovering near my arm, trying to bridge the gap. "You can't really kick us out, honey. You can't put your sister on the street. Think about the memories in this house. Think about the bond we share. Money comes and goes, but family is forever. You are a Brooks. You wouldn't destroy your own bloodline." I watched them. I watched the performance. 10 minutes ago, I was a stranger. 10 minutes ago, I was an investment loss. Now, suddenly, I was the beloved daughter. They were trying to rewrite history in real time, hoping that the tug of biology would be strong enough to make me forget the abuse. I stood up, picking up my iPad and sliding it back into my bag. I zipped it shut with a finality that echoed in the room. I looked at my mother, whose hand was still outstretched, waiting for me to take it, waiting for me to break down and say that everything was forgiven. I didn't take her hand. I took a step back. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice ice cold. "You did say something important tonight. I remember it clearly." I looked her dead in the eye. "When you wanted me to sign that loan, you told me that if I walked out that door without paying, I was choosing to be a stranger. You said if I didn't give you money, I had no obligation to this family, and you had no obligation to me." My mother flinched, opening her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "You set the terms, Mother. You defined the relationship. You said I was a stranger if I didn't pay. Well, I am not paying. I am collecting. So, I am just honoring your wishes. I am acting exactly like the stranger you told me I was. And strangers don't give out free houses." My mother stepped back, her face crumbling as the reality of my rejection hit her. She looked at my father, but he was staring at the floor, broken and defeated. The silence in the room was thick with the dust of their collapsed world. But there was one rat still trying to swim off the sinking ship. Chad cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. He stepped away from Bianca, creating a physical distance between himself and his wife, as if her proximity might infect him with her failure. He smoothed his tie, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and fixed a trembling smile on his face as he turned toward me. "Nia," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "listen, I think things have gotten a little heated here. Emotions are running high. But let us be rational adults for a second." He took a step closer to me, ignoring Bianca's confused stare. "I didn't know," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I swear to you, I didn't know the truth. Your parents, they told me you were struggling. They told me you were financially illiterate. They painted a picture of you that was completely false. I was acting on bad intelligence, Nia. You know how it is in business. If the data is bad, the decision is bad." I watched him. It was fascinating in a morbid way. He was trying to rewrite reality in real time. "What are you saying, Chad?" I asked, keeping my face impassive. "I am saying that I was misled," he said quickly, gaining confidence. "I am a victim here too. I married into this family thinking they had assets, thinking they had integrity. But look at them. They are frauds. They lied to you, and they lied to me." "Chad?" Bianca whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Chad spun around, his face twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. "Shut up, Bianca. Just shut up. I am trying to fix the mess you made." He turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Nia, look. I have experience. I know the market. I know I made some bad calls with the crypto, but that was because I was under pressure to fund your sister's lifestyle. Do you have any idea how much she spends? She is a black hole. She drains me dry. But with your capital and my connections, we could be a team. I could help you manage your portfolio. We could cut them out." He gestured vaguely at his wife and in-laws. "You don't need dead weight, Nia, and neither do I. We are the only two people in this room who understand how the world really works." The sound of a chair crashing backward echoed through the room. Bianca was on her feet. She looked like she had been slapped. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of horror and disbelief that was almost painful to watch. "Dead weight?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am your wife, Chad. I am the reason you are even in this house. You haven't paid for a single dinner in 3 years. You drive a car my father leased. You wear suits my mother bought. And you call me dead weight?" Chad laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "You are useless, Bianca. Look at you. You have no talent. You have no job. You have no money. The only thing you had was the promise of an inheritance, and now that is gone. What do you bring to the table? Nothing. You are just a spoiled brat who needs a mommy and daddy to pay her bills. I am sick of carrying you. I am sick of pretending your little art projects are real work." He looked at me, winking as if we were sharing an inside joke. "She thinks she is an interior designer, Nia. Can you believe that? She can't even design a budget. She is a parasite, and I am done being the host." Bianca let out a shriek of pure rage. She lunged at him. This time there was no holding back. She clawed at his face, her nails leaving angry red welt across his cheek. Chad stumbled back, shouting, trying to push her off. They crashed into the sideboard, sending a vase of flowers shattering to the floor. "Get off me, you crazy witch!" Chad yelled, shoving her hard. She fell back onto the floor, landing in a heap of broken porcelain and water. My parents stood frozen, watching their golden couple, their perfect investment, tear each other apart like wild dogs. The facade of the happy, successful family didn't just crack, it exploded. I stood there, watching the chaos. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a cold, clinical observation. This was what happened when relationships were built on transaction rather than affection. When the currency ran out, the loyalty evaporated. Chad straightened his jacket, panting, bleeding from a scratch on his nose. He looked at me, expecting approval. "See?" he panted. "She is unstable. You and I, Nia, we are better than this. Just give me a chance. Let me look at your deal flow. I can prove my worth." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown a coat in my face an hour ago. I looked at the man who had threatened to ruin my career. "You are right, Chad," I said softly. "You do have potential. You have the potential to be an excellent example of what happens when you cross me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't dial. I just pressed a single button on the screen. The front door, which I had left unlocked, burst open. Heavy footsteps thudded against the hardwood floor. 2 men in dark suits entered the dining room. They were not police. They were private security contractors. I had hired them 3 hours ago to wait in the car, just in case my family decided that physical violence was the answer to their financial problems. Chad froze. He looked at the guards, then at me. Who are they?" "Security," I said simply. I assumed that once the eviction notice was served, things might get volatile. I like to mitigate risk. I pointed at Chad. "Remove him first. He is trespassing." The guards moved instantly. They were professionals. They didn't speak. They just grabbed Chad by the arms. "Wait!" Chad screamed as they hauled him backward. "Nia, wait! We can talk about this. I can be an asset. Don't do this!" I watched as they dragged him out of the room, his heels digging uselessly into the expensive rug, his pleas fading into the night air. I looked down at Bianca, who was sobbing on the floor amidst the wreckage of the flowers. I looked at my parents, who were clinging to each other in the corner. The dinner party was officially over. The silence that followed Chad's forcible removal was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the heavy oak door clicking shut. The security guards had done their job with professional efficiency, leaving behind a vacuum of power that my parents were frantically trying to fill with their own desperation. They looked at the empty doorway where their favorite son-in-law had just vanished. Then they looked at Bianca, who was reduced to a puddle of silk and tears on the floor. And finally, they looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look small. He had always been a giant to me, a looming figure of authority and judgment, but now, stripped of his assets and his pride, he was just an old man in a suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. His legs seemed to give out. He didn't sit down. He sank. Slowly, painfully, my father lowered himself onto his knees on the hardwood floor. It was a shocking, grotesque sight. A man who had spent 30 years looking down on me was now physically looking up at me. My mother, seeing him collapse, let out a sob and fell to her knees beside him, clutching his arm as if it were the only thing keeping her from drifting away. "Nia, please," my father croaked, his voice cracking with a vulnerability I had never heard before. "You cannot do this. You cannot take the house. It is all we have. It is our legacy. Where will we go? We are in our 60s. We cannot start over. We have no savings. We gave everything to Chad." My mother crawled forward a few inches, reaching for the hem of my pants, but I stepped back before she could touch me. "We are your parents, Nia," she wept, her face blotchy and swollen. "We gave you life. We raised you. Does that mean nothing? You cannot throw us out on the street like garbage. People will talk. The neighbors will see. How can you be so cruel to the people who brought you into this world?" I looked down at them. I felt a strange sense of vertigo, as if the world had flipped upside down. For decades, I had been the one begging for attention, begging for approval, begging for a shred of the love they showered on Bianca. Now, they were on their knees, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard clarity. "You call this cruel?" I asked, my voice echoing in the large, empty room. "You think this is cruelty?" I began to circle them, walking slowly, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. "Cruelty is telling your 10-year-old daughter she cannot go to summer camp because you need the money for her sister's ballet lessons, and then buying a new car the next week. Cruelty is missing my high school graduation because Bianca had a headache. Cruelty is calling me on my birthday not to wish me a happy year, but to ask if I can lend you money for a vacation I wasn't invited to." I stopped in front of my father. "You mentioned legacy, Dad. You said this house is your legacy. But earlier tonight, when you thought I was poor, you told me I was a sunk cost. Do you remember that? You sat there, drinking your expensive wine, and you told me I was a bad investment because I didn't marry rich. You measured my worth in dollars and cents." I turned to my mother, and you asked for mercy. You asked if raising me meant nothing. Let me ask you, Mom. When I was 18 and I sliced my hand open at that factory you forced me to work in, did you show me mercy? Or did you complain that the blood ruined your car upholstery on the way to the hospital? When I was depressed and lonely in my 20s, working 2 jobs to build my company, did you offer me a home? Or did you tell me to stop being so negative because it was bringing down the mood for Bianca? My mother flinched with every word, shrinking away as if I were physically striking her. I am not being cruel, I said softly. I am just returning the energy you gave me. You spent 20 years teaching me that love is transactional. You taught me that value is determined by financial output. You taught me that if you cannot pay, you do not belong. I looked at the eviction notice still lying on the table. I am simply following the rules you wrote. You cannot pay, therefore, you do not belong. My father put his head in his hands and began to weep, deep, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. My mother wailed, rocking back and forth. Please, Nia, she begged. We will do anything. We will live in the guest room. We will cook. We will clean. Just don't make us leave. Don't make us homeless. I watched them for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. I wasn't going to let them stay. That was impossible. But I wasn't a monster. I wasn't them. I had prepared for this moment with the same meticulous attention to detail that I applied to my business deals. Get up, I said sharply. They stopped crying and looked up, hope flickering in their eyes. I am not going to put you on the street, I said. Unlike you, I understand the basic responsibilities of family, even a failed one. I have arranged housing for you. My mother let out a gasp of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Naya. I knew you had a heart. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. Where is it? Is it the condo in Boca? Or maybe an apartment downtown? I smiled. It was a tight, humorless smile. No, Mom. It is not in Boca. And it is certainly not downtown. I reached into my bag and pulled out a set of keys. They were plain, silver keys attached to a cheap plastic tag. I have signed a 1-year lease in your name for a 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial district on the south side. It is secure, it is clean, but I must warn you, it is quite small, about 900 square feet. The windows look out onto a brick wall, so there is not much natural light. And the building is old, so the plumbing rattles, and it smells faintly of mildew when it rains. I dropped the keys onto the table next to the eviction notice. Does that description sound familiar to you? It should, because it is the exact same square footage, the exact same lack of light, and the exact same smell as the basement you just tried to rent to me for $2,500 a month. My parents stared at the keys. The relief drained from their faces, replaced by a new kind of horror. They realized this wasn't a gift. It was a lesson. I paid the first month and the security deposit, I said, turning away from them. Consider it my final investment in this family. After this month, the rent is on you. It is $1,200. I suggest you start looking for jobs. I hear the canning factory is hiring. The next hour was a masterclass in humiliation, but not the kind I had orchestrated. It was the kind they inflicted on themselves. I stood by the kitchen island, leaning against the marble countertop with my arms crossed, watching the dismantling of the Brooks family dynasty. I had given them strict instructions. They could take their clothes. They could take their personal toiletries. They could take documents that legally belonged to them. Everything else, Every stick of furniture, every appliance, every piece of art, and every electronic device that had been purchased with the equity from the house or the credit cards I was now liable for stayed exactly where it was. My father moved like a ghost. He was dragging a large suitcase from the hallway closet, his movements slow and jerky. He tried to reach for the 60-inch television remote, acting on muscle memory, before he caught my eye. I didn't say a word. I just raised an eyebrow. He dropped his hand, his shoulders slumping, and turned away to pack his socks. It was pathetic, really. A man who had defined himself by his possessions was suddenly realizing that he owned absolutely nothing. The leather recliner he loved? Bought on a credit card that was now in collections. The golf clubs? A gift from a client he had lost years ago. He was leaving this house with less than he had entered it with 30 years ago. My mother was worse. She was frantic, flitting around the living room like a trapped bird. She kept trying to slip small things into her purse, a crystal vase, a silver picture frame, a set of heavy coasters. "Put it back, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the room. She froze, clutching a silver candlestick to her chest. "Nia, this is a family heirloom. It belonged to your great-aunt Clara." "No," I corrected her. "Great-aunt Clara left that to me in her will. You took it from my room when I went to college because you said it fit the dining room aesthetic better. It is mine. Put it back." She let out a sob, slamming the candlestick down on the table with enough force to dent the wood. "You are stripping us bare. You are taking the shirt off our backs." "I am letting you keep the shirts," I said calmly, "even though I am pretty sure I paid for the dry cleaning on that blouse you are wearing." But the real problem, as always, was Bianca. She wasn't packing. She was looting. She was running from room to room, grabbing whatever she could carry. She tried to take the espresso machine. The security guard gently but firmly took it out of her hands. She tried to take the Dyson vacuum cleaner. He blocked her path. She was screaming, cursing, spitting venom at anyone who came near her. She looked less like a human being and more like a tornado of entitlement. "I need my things!" she shrieked, trying to wrestle a cashmere throw blanket away from the guard. "This is mine! I picked it out!" "You picked it out with Dad's credit card," I reminded her, "which means the debt holder owns it. And since I own the debt, I own the blanket. Drop it, Bianca." She threw the blanket on the floor and stormed toward the front door, her eyes scanning the room for anything, absolutely anything, she could use to hurt me or enrich herself. That was when her eyes landed on my purse. It was sitting on the entryway table where I had left it after pulling out the iPad. It was a Birkin, a real one, not the knockoffs she bought on Canal Street. It was black crocodile leather with gold hardware, worth more than the car she drove. I saw the look in her eyes. It was pure, unadulterated greed mixed with spite. She thought I wasn't looking. She thought the guards were distracted by my father struggling with his suitcase. She walked past the table, feigning a sudden calm. As she passed my bag, her hand shot out like a viper. She grabbed the handle and shoved the bag under her oversized coat in one fluid motion, hugging it to her side as she made a break for the door. She almost made it. She had her hand on the doorknob. She was 3 seconds away from freedom. "Halt!" I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. The 2 security guards, who had been trained to watch for exactly this kind of behavior, stepped in front of the door, blocking her exit. "Move!" Bianca screamed, trying to push past them. "Get out of my way! I am leaving!" I walked over to her slowly. She backed up until she hit the wall, clutching her coat tight around her midsection. She looked at me with wild, defiant eyes. "What?" she spat. "I am just leaving. You kicked us out, remember? Let me go." "Open your coat, Bianca," I said. She laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You are crazy. I am not opening anything. You don't have the right to search me. That is illegal." "Actually, stealing property worth $40,000 is illegal," I said. "And since I saw you take it, and the guards saw you take it, we are well within our rights to detain you until the authorities arrive." I didn't have to wait long. I had called the non-emergency line 10 minutes ago when the screaming started, anticipating that the eviction would not go smoothly. Through the glass panels of the front door, I saw the flashing blue and red lights of a patrol car pulling into the driveway. Bianca saw the lights too. Her face went white. "You called the cops?" she whispered. "On your own sister?" I didn't answer. I just nodded to the guard. He reached out and pulled her coat open. My black Birkin bag fell to the floor with a heavy thud. My mother let out a wail from the living room. "No! Nia, tell them it was a mistake. She just borrowed it. She didn't mean to steal it." 2 police officers stepped through the front door, the cold night air following them in. They looked at the scene, the crying parents, the screaming sister, the expensive bag on the floor, and me, standing calmly in the center of the storm. "Officer," I said, pointing at the bag, "that represents grand larceny, and I would like to press charges." "Nia, no!" my father shouted, rushing forward, but stopping short when the officer held up a hand. "You cannot do this. She is family. You will ruin her record. She will never get a job." She should have thought about that before she tried to rob the person who just gave her a free apartment, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. The officer looked at Bianca. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." As they clicked the handcuffs onto Bianca's wrists, she started screaming my name. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a curse. She screamed that she hated me. She screamed that I was dead to her. She screamed until they shoved her into the back of the patrol car. I watched through the window as the car pulled away. My parents were standing on the porch, clutching their meager suitcases, looking at the taillights disappearing into the dark. They were homeless. Their golden child was in custody, and their scapegoat was locking the door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and let out a long breath. The house was silent. Finally, it was silent. I was alone in the empty hallway, surrounded by the ghosts of a childhood I had just exorcised. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. But as I looked down at my scarred hand, I realized it was the only way I could ever truly heal. The surgery was over. The tumor was removed. Now, the recovery could begin. The 30 days that followed the eviction were quiet for me, but they were a cacophony of destruction for the people who used to call themselves my family. I did not have to lift a finger to punish them. I simply removed the safety net of my silence and let gravity take its course. The first domino to fall was Chad. It turned out that the investors he had bragged about, the ones he borrowed money from to fund his crypto obsession, were not the kind of people who filed lawsuits when you defaulted. They were the kind of people who showed up at your motel room at 3 a.m. with baseball bats. I heard through the grapevine, meaning the police reports filed in the county database, that Chad was found beaten half to death in the parking lot of a Motel 6 2 weeks after the dinner. His BMW had been repossessed days earlier, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The man who had sneered at my Honda and called me a peasant was now begging for change and hiding from loan sharks who didn't care about his expensive suits or his fake connections. He had tried to leverage my name, telling his creditors that his sister-in-law was the CEO of NB Ventures and would vouch for him. When they called my office to verify, my assistant followed my standing order. She told them we had never heard of him. That was the last shred of protection he had, and I stripped it away without blinking. Bianca did not fare much better. The divorce filing hit the public records 3 days after the eviction. It was not amicable. Chad tried to sue her for half of her assets, only to realize she had absolutely nothing but credit card debt and a closet full of clothes she couldn't sell because she had damaged them in her fits of rage. But the real blow to Bianca was not the divorce. It was the internet. The mugshot from the night she tried to steal my Birkin bag was leaked. I didn't leak it, but I certainly didn't pay to have it suppressed. It went viral locally. The image of the golden child, mascara running, hair wild, screaming at the camera, became the laughingstock of the social circle she had tried so desperately to impress. The interior design contract she lied about having obviously never materialized, and no reputable firm would hire a woman with a grand larceny charge pending. She was forced to take a job as a hostess at a chain restaurant, the very kind of establishment she used to mock. Every time she seated a customer, she had to wonder if they had seen her mugshot, if they were whispering about the fallen princess of the Brooks family. And then there were my parents. I drove past the industrial district once, about 3 weeks in. I didn't stop. I just wanted to see. The apartment complex was a gray, hulking block of concrete next to a recycling plant. The air smelled of burning rubber and stale garbage. I imagined my mother, with her delicate sensibilities and her need for luxury, trying to sleep while the heavy machinery rumbled next door. I imagined my father, who prided himself on being the king of his castle, staring at the peeling paint and the leaking ceiling of his 900-square-foot kingdom. But the cruelest punishment for them wasn't the poverty. It was the visibility of my success. They couldn't escape me. 2 weeks after I evicted them, Forbes magazine hit the newsstands. My face was on the cover. I was wearing a white power suit, looking calm and commanding, under the headline, "The Silent Titan: How Nia Brooks Built a $500 million Empire from the Shadows." I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father saw it. He still went to the same convenience store to buy his lottery tickets, clinging to the hope of a lucky break. I could picture him standing in the checkout line, looking at the magazine rack, and seeing the daughter he called a failure staring back at him as a titan. He would have to pay $7 just to read about the life he could have been a part of if he hadn't been so blinded by favoritism. He would have to read the interview where I credited my success to resilience and independence, conspicuously leaving out any mention of parental support. That magazine cover must have been the breaking point. It must have been the moment they realized that their pride was worth nothing compared to the proximity to that kind of power. Because the next day, my old phone number, the one I had kept for 15 years, began to ring. It rang incessantly. Voicemails started piling up. First from my mother, weeping, apologizing, saying she missed my voice. Then from my father, trying to sound jovial, acting like nothing had happened, asking if we could meet for coffee to catch up. They wanted to crawl back. They wanted to be the parents of the Forbes cover girl. They wanted to tell their friends that the billionaire on the newsstand was their beloved daughter. But they were calling a ghost. I had already ported my number to a new unlisted service the morning after Thanksgiving. The phone they were calling was sitting in a drawer in my office, powered down, the SIM card destroyed. Eventually, the service was disconnected entirely. I can only imagine the sound of that disconnection tone, the sharp, three-note melody, followed by the automated voice saying, "The number you have reached is no longer in service." It was the final door closing. It was the sound of the check bouncing. It was the sound of them realizing that they hadn't just lost a house, they had lost access. And for people like them, loss of access was a fate worse than death. They were left in their cramped apartment with their regrets, while I was somewhere they could not reach, building a world where they did not exist. I drove for 20 minutes in complete silence. The radio was off. The windows were up. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the beating of my own heart, which was finally, slowly, returning to a normal rhythm. I navigated the familiar curves of the highway, leaving the sprawling suburbs and the toxicity of my childhood home behind in the rearview mirror. As the city skyline came into view, glittering against the dark November sky, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was as if I had been carrying a backpack filled with stones for 34 years, and I had finally just unbuckled the straps and let it drop. I pulled into the underground garage of the Meridian Tower, the glass and steel skyscraper where I owned the penthouse. The valet, a kind man named Roberts, who knew me not as the family's scapegoat, but as Miss Brooks, the generous tipper, opened my car door with a genuine smile. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make a snide comment about my shoes. He simply wished me a happy Thanksgiving. It was a small interaction, but after the nightmare I had just endured, it felt like a warm embrace. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was smooth and silent. When the doors slid open, I stepped into my sanctuary. My home was everything my parents' house was not. It was open, filled with light even at night, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city I had helped build with my investments. There were no heavy drapes to hide behind, no dark corners for secrets to fester. It was a space of clarity. I walked into the kitchen, which was sleek and modern, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. The trembling that had started when Bianca threw the wine at me was gone. I walked over to the window and looked down at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in the dark industrial district to the south, my parents were unlocking the door to a cramped, musty apartment. They were probably looking at the peeling paint and blaming me. They were probably calling me names. But up here, I couldn't hear them. Up here, they were just tiny, insignificant specks in a vast universe. A wave of loneliness hit me then. It wasn't a sharp pain, more like a dull ache. It is a strange thing to orphan yourself. Even when your parents are monsters, cutting the cord feels like an amputation. I wondered if I had been too harsh. I wondered if I should have just written the check and kept the peace. But then I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the wine stain on my sweater. I remembered the look in my father's eyes when he realized I had money. He hadn't looked at me with love. He had looked at me with hunger. And I knew I had made the only choice possible. My intercom buzzed, startling me out of my thoughts. I pressed the button. "Miss Brooks? It is the concierge. You have guests." I smiled. "Send them up." I hadn't told my family I had plans. I hadn't told them that the only reason I went to their dinner so early was that I had a real engagement later. The elevator doors opened again, and this time, the silence of the penthouse was shattered by laughter and the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary. A group of 6 people spilled into my hallway. There was David, my chief financial officer, holding 2 bottles of vintage champagne. There was Sarah, My executive assistant, who knew my coffee order better than I did, balancing a massive tray of stuffing. There was Marcus, my oldest friend from the coding boot camp I had taken in secret years ago, carrying a turkey that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. These people didn't share my DNA. They didn't know what I looked like as a baby. But they knew who I was. They knew my integrity. They knew my work ethic. They had seen me at my lowest, when deals fell through and the market crashed. And they had stayed. They didn't stay because I paid them. They stayed because we respected each other. "Nia!" David shouted, spotting me by the window. "You are late! We were about to start eating in the lobby." I walked over to them, and I was enveloped in hugs. Real hugs. Not the stiff, performative embraces of my mother, but warm, squeezing hugs that made me feel solid. "I am sorry," I said, grabbing a bottle of champagne. "I had to take out the trash." Marcus looked at me, knowing exactly where I had been. "Did it go okay?" I popped the cork, the sound echoing festively in the room. "Let's just say the trash has been handled," I said, pouring glasses for everyone, "and the recycling has been sent to a facility on the south side." Laughter filled the room, bright and genuine. We sat around my dining table, which was made of reclaimed wood and glass, not mahogany and pretense. We passed plates of food. We told jokes. We talked about the future, about new technologies, about art, about life. No one asked me for a loan. No one compared me to someone else. No one made me feel small so they could feel big. As I looked around the table at these faces, illuminated by the city lights and the warmth of our friendship, I realized that I wasn't empty at all. I was full. I had spent so many years begging for a seat at a table where I was being served poison that I had almost forgotten I had the power to build my own table. I raised my glass for a toast. The room quieted down. "To family," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Not the one you are born into, but the one you find along the way. Thank you for being my safety net. Thank you for seeing me." "Nia!" they cheered, clinking glasses. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted crisp and clean, washing away the lingering bitterness of the cheap wine and cheaper insults from earlier in the evening. I walked back to the window one last time as the night wound down. I looked at the reflection of the woman in the glass. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a scapegoat. She was Nia Brooks, founder, CEO, survivor. For anyone out there who is holding on to a toxic relationship because you are afraid of the silence that comes after the breakup, let me tell you this. The silence isn't scary. It is peaceful. It is the sound of you finally listening to your own needs. You do not owe anyone your future just because they are part of your past. You do not owe anyone your sanity just because they share your last name. My parents and my sister are probably sitting in the dark right now, nursing their grievances, telling themselves that I am the villain of their story. And that is fine. I will be the villain in their story, so I can be the hero in mine. Because the sweetest revenge isn't screaming. It isn't fighting. It isn't even evicting them, though that was admittedly satisfying. The sweetest revenge is not making it about them at all. The sweetest revenge is taking the love they didn't want, the success they didn't believe in, and the life they tried to crush, and using it to be happy. Truly, unapologetically happy. The sweetest revenge is not to harm them, but to let them watch from a distance as you shine so brightly that they realize they are the ones who are truly left in the dark. For years, I dimmed my light to fit into my family's shadow, believing that if I sacrificed enough, I would finally earn their love. But I learned a hard truth. You cannot buy affection from people who are committed to using you. My worth was never defined by their rejection, just as my success is not defined by their validation. Walking away was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. I realized that biology makes us relatives, but loyalty, respect, and unconditional support are what make us family. Sometimes the empty chair at the table is the most peaceful place to be. If this story inspired you to set boundaries in your own life, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below.